On today's World Insights, the future of China-U.S. relations in the spotlight. Would it be pragmatism or acrimony that benefits all in a turbulent world? Former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Jisi shed light on China-U.S. ties in an online seminar.
We have a serious problem in Sino-American relations.
99-year-old Kissinger famously helped the late U.S. President Richard Nixon make an ice-breaking trip to China half a century ago. Other esteemed guests joining this panel include Dr. Qiu Yuanping, former Minister of the State Council's Office for Overseas Chinese Affairs, Ambassador Cui Tiankai, former Chinese ambassador to the U.S., Professor Wang Jisi, President of the Institute of International and Strategic Studies at Peking University, Ambassador Robert Zoellick, former Governor of the World Bank and former U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, Ambassador Stapleton Roy, former U.S. Ambassador to China, and Dr. Richard Haass, President of the Council on Foreign Relations.
And this is true in many other issues that exist.
Many people talk about history. 很多人今天都谈到历史哈。
Many people have raised questions on whether it was the wrong decision to establish diplomatic relationships between China and the U.S. How should we look back on that period of time?
当时那段历史，现在如何回看？
基辛格博士第一次来中国的时候说过这么一句话。
The first time Dr. Kissinger came to China, he said that it was global trends that brought us here, and it is reality that took us here, and the reality that will also determine our future. We are now facing a choice whether China and the U.S. should continue to live in peace or move towards confrontation and conflict, whether we should stick to dialogue and cooperation or return to the days of estrangement and antagonism. So my question is why some people believe that China will tie its future to competition with the United States and seek hegemony over the United States. China is one of the biggest beneficiary and contributor to the existing international order. Why should we challenge and reshape the international order? China represents 1/5 of global population, and we have extensive links with the rest of the world. Is it possible to contain China? Will containing China solve the real problems in the United States? Will there be a winner in China-U.S. conflicts given the trend of globalization and nuclear deterrence? Will the world have to make a choice between the two countries? Does it serve the interests of the U.S. and American people to create an enemy and put the country and the world in a dangerous situation? If we do not break such absurd logic, any trichotomy or three-point approach is just old wine in a new bottle, and it will bring nothing but wars and conflicts. I do hope scholars can work together to break this dilemma with conscience and intelligence.
拿出我们的良知和智慧来，共同破解这个魔症。
我们大家应该还记得50年以前，亚太地区是个什么状况。
We all remembered how Asia, or the Asia-Pacific region, looked like 50 years ago. When you compare and contrast today and yesterday, you can see countries including China and the U.S. and other Asia-Pacific countries. We need to make the right choice of cooperation. Over the past decades, among the achievements that this region has made, the normalization of China-U.S. relations played a huge role in producing those achievements. Of course, we commend other countries for their efforts and contribution, but I think it's fair to say that the normalization of China-U.S. relations contributed a lot. If this was the right thing to do, why are some people trying to turn back the wheel? Do they want to resume war, conflict, turbulence, poverty, distrust, and instability? Do they want all that again? This is something worthy of our attention.
不稳定这种状态吗？
Nothing is inevitable. Nothing is a given. Nothing should be taken granted, especially history. Dr. Haass, would you like to follow up?
50 years ago, the impetus for U.S.-Chinese relations, for creating a new relationship, was we had the, if you will, advantage of what we knew what we were against, which was the challenge posed by the Soviet Union. I think now we face a much more difficult foreign policy or diplomatic challenge, which is decide what we are for. We need a positive agenda. And in my own experience, it's often more difficult to intellectually develop and then build political support for positive agendas than it is negative agendas. And I think to add to it even more is we are going to have inevitable disagreements. So the challenge will be, can we preserve and ideally expand areas of cooperation, even though we have inevitable areas of competition and disagreement? And I think, again, this is difficult. And then I'd say one last thing. What's fundamentally different about this era is that American and Chinese diplomacy, and to some extent geopolitical competition, takes place in an era which is increasingly dominated by global issues. And global issues like climate change or infectious disease or proliferation. So the question will be, can the United States and China, despite their very different systems, despite their inevitable competitive dimensions, can they still find areas to cooperate on issues where it's in their mutual self-interest to cooperate? And if we cannot, if our inevitable differences get in the way of cooperation, even when our mutual self-interest is there, I think historians of the future will rightfully and properly be quite critical.
Thank you, Dr. Haass. If I remember right, all of you seem to touch on the issue that China-U.S. relations is inevitably not just about a bilateral relations, but rather global issues, many of you mentioned, and also regional, if not global peace. So you talk about self-interest, which I really wonder how we define self-interest. Does our self-interest also include the interest of the others, which will have an impact on us as well? So I would throw that question, too sophisticated for me to handle. Ambassador Roy, would you like to take that? And also your analysis of the current situation.
For dialogue to be effective, you have to know what you are talking about and what the purpose of the dialogue is. And this is where I am most troubled about the current state of U.S.-China relations. We are not defining our strategic objectives toward China in a meaningful way. In other words, you can't just refer to the existence of competition, rivalry, cooperation as elements of the U.S.-China relationship. You have to say, what is your goal? Is your goal to win the competition? Is your goal to let cooperation become the dominant feature of the relationship again? And we are not defining that. What we are seeing now is a progressive breakdown of the global order. And it seems to me that China and the United States need to begin to address that question. The United States prefers that China simply agree to sustain an order which was largely created by the United States. And China is making it clear it's not prepared to accept that as the goal. My view is that China and the United States need to think seriously about what type of world order is compatible with the interests of other countries. We can't ignore India, we can't ignore Japan, we can't ignore Brazil. We need a world, we're seeing one of the most stable orders in the world was in Europe for over 50 years, and now that order is breaking down. And certainly China and the United States have an overwhelming national interest into not having the breakdown of the order in Europe again replicate itself in the Pacific, so that we end up with a breakdown of the order in the Pacific that has enabled so many countries in the region to engage in extraordinary economic development while military budgets were kept reasonably under control. That, it seems to me, is what we need to be engaging on. But our problem is, are we producing leaders who are capable of addressing that type of big issue? And do we have national consensuses that would enable us to gain the support necessary for an approach along those lines?
And this is true in many other issues that exist.
About the real goals of communication, negotiation, dialogue, about sustainable, inclusive, and sound order in the region and beyond with leadership. Thank you so much. On those points, many points Ambassador Roy and others made already. So 我也想请王吉思教授呢。
Now I will invite Dr. Wang Jisi to share his thoughts on the current state of China-U.S. relations.
关于中美关系的目前状态，大家已经谈了不少。我有3点忧虑。第一点呢，关于
I have 3 concerns. First, it's about China-U.S. dialogue. It's good to have China-U.S. dialogue, but now we only have to meet virtually and not meet in person. It's become a problem and a challenge to overcome. The flights between the countries can be opened as quickly as possible and have more thorough discussion. Since we cannot meet each other, we can't know in depth the other side's intentions. My second concern is that since the Trump administration started the trade war, the bilateral economic relations have not been as in the past. Though things are improving, it's still not satisfactory. When I was in the United States, there are many American experts who want trade with China, and they are optimistic about the Chinese market. When they say something positive about China, they'll be accused by some Americans as putting their business before the national interests. If the situation continues like this, how are we going to show the benefits of a healthy China-U.S. relationship?
特朗普政府对中国进行贸易战以来呢，双方的经贸关系呢，虽然还维持了，但是没有像过去那么好了。
My third concern is the deteriorating public opinions towards each other. There is not much positive coverage towards China in the U.S. Just now, Ambassador Roy talked about the importance of order. I think order is a very important concern. The U.S. should support China. This is a sound order. At the same time, the U.S. should work with China to build international order, which was emphasized by Dr. Kissinger. So in my view, it's my duty to work with the U.S. to uphold the global order, so the two countries can sit down and work together and stabilize the world situation, and that would be very important.
Now, all of you have been talking about the realities, while at the same time partly providing the solutions. I could read between the lines to a certain extent. But what kind of prospect are we building? It's a big question. But I think every one of you have already got some of your answers to this big question. Maybe I start with Ambassador Roy, and then I just go with the flow. Ambassador Roy, please.
I would like again to cite a book by Dr. Kissinger on China.
You've read all the books of Dr. Kissinger already, right, Ambassador Roy?
Yes.
Let's do a book club. Okay, please go ahead.
In the preface to that book, he noted that both China and the United States have refused to permit historic legacies or different conceptions of domestic order to interrupt their essentially cooperative relationship. That is no longer an accurate description of how we are dealing with each other. And it seems to me that to move the relationship in the right direction, we need to learn from that statement about how to be able to maintain cooperation despite the differences in our domestic orders and in our concept of the international orders. I will make one final point, and Bob Zoellick can contradict me on this if he wishes. If the first President Bush had been reelected at a time when the Soviet Union was collapsing, I think the United States had an opportunity to try to adjust the global order in cooperation with other countries. But instead, President Bush, who was capable and had advisors such as Jim Baker and Bob Zoellick, who could have thought that way, instead, we ended up with a governor from Arkansas who did not think in terms of global order or have the background in order to think that way. Normally, you only have these opportunities after great conflicts. And the question is, we don't want a great conflict in order for us to be able to think about the adjustments in the world order that are necessary. Political correctness and conventional thinking will not address the problems that we need to address.
Thank you, Ambassador Roy. Well, Ambassador Zoellick, Ambassador Roy is already calling on your name. So please go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure this evening for us or this morning for you is the time to hypothesize about what President Bush 41 would have done in a second term. Although a little known document is one I wrote when I went to the White House outlining his future economic policy, but that was not to be. And it's probably a fair question for Richard Haass because he was a director of policy planning. And so he takes charge of those big policy perspectives for the future. I would just, again, reference history to try to give some insight for our Chinese colleagues of what's going on in the United States, which I can tell from your comments and questions is probably a combination of confusing and frustrating and disappointing. If you look at the U.S. relationship with China, actually dating back even before our Constitution, there were three themes that keep recurring. One is the prospect of China as a great commercial opportunity or dream. And I referenced Robert Morris, who was the financier of our revolution, sent a ship called the Empress of China in 1784 with ginseng from Appalachia that made a huge profit. And ever since then, Americans thought there'd be great opportunities to make economic gains in China, but it's always a light that just glimmers slightly over the horizon. I have a book in my basement that State probably knows by Carl Crow, written in 1937, saying 400 million customers of China. This is always the dream. And it is important to recognize that prior to President Trump, the export growth of the United States, China was the fastest growing market for some 15 years. But as some have mentioned tonight, there was a big disappointment in the business and economic community. And that will be an issue that cannot be ignored because it's a basis of potential links and support.
And this is true in many other issues that exist.
Modernize the thinking. Ambassador Cui, please, the final words also from you as well.
First of all, I want to echo the points made by Ambassador Roy just now. I totally agree that we must have the objective in our mind when we manage our relations, what we are aiming at. And I also agree that the ultimate question is what kind of a world order we want to build, we want to have. We in China, we don't want to get rid of the existing order totally and replace it with something entirely new. We still want to maintain and safeguard the international order with the UN at the core. Now people talk about the need for the so-called guardrail for our relations. I understand what they mean, and I don't question their intention. But the problem is that if we don't know where we are heading, what is the use of these guardrails? If the relations are going the wrong way, what is the use of the guardrails? To help us to keep things going in the wrong direction? So we must try to reach a mutual understanding about what kind of world order we want to have. For us, it's quite clear. We want to build a community of nations with a shared future. And that community of nations include China, of course, also includes United States. It's all inclusive, it's open. It should be a joint venture, not only between our two countries, but with the entire international community. Number two, I fully share the concern and the frustration expressed by Jis just now. I'm worried about the quality of communication between us. Sometimes it's too much for political show or for political correctness than for substantive policy exchanges. There's so much suspicion, fear, panic. We should have much better communication between us. We should sit down and have real discussions. And for that purpose, I certainly support the point made by Jisi. We need talks in person, face to face, not just online. Then last but not least, on the issue of Ukraine. I think that there is such a misunderstanding of China's position and how China feels about the situation in Ukraine. First of all, I think now the priority is to stop the fighting and engage in serious negotiations. Maybe not only between Russia and Ukraine, but also between Russia and the NATO members, and even between Russia and the United States. We in China, we always stand for peaceful solution to any conflicts. We always stand for negotiations. And this has been our position all along. I still remember some years ago, then President Obama invited the ambassador of China, Russia, Britain, France, Germany, and the European Union to talk to some of the senators to explain to them the usefulness of the Iranian nuclear deal. Then in a couple of years, United States just withdraw from the deal. So this kind of on and off approach is destroying, is hurting people's confidence in American foreign policy. And in his book, Ambassador Zoellick talked about the traditions of American foreign policy. One of them is the belief that American policy should serve a larger purpose. So my question is the larger purpose still there? And what is the larger purpose today?
I thought it was my job to ask the questions, but Ambassador Cui used several questions to present his views. We have more questions coming actually from the audience that are watching and also participating in today's online virtual discussions. But it's impossible to cover all these questions. What shall I do? Maybe the best way is to go back to Dr. Kissinger, the real reason why we are here and why we feel so warm and also philosophical with the support of history today. Dr. Kissinger, please.
We have a serious problem in Sino-American relations, and we need a serious dialogue to deal with it. On my first visit to China, and actually in my first speech, I said something about having arrived in what to us is a land of mystery. And Zhou Enlai interrupted and asked me what I thought was so mysterious about China. And I did not give a very brilliant answer. And he said, perhaps what we should aim for is that as we meet, we should become less mysterious to each other. I think this is still our challenge. Some progress was made in the first 50 years, but we now face a world of different complexities with different evolutions. And we have to begin to define for each other what we consider the obstacles to progress and what we consider the goals we can achieve. I've just finished a book on leadership, and at the end, it's about global issues. I return to China and the United States, and I say we have, above all, to define a code of coexistence so that we do not feel threatened by what the other side does, and so that we can define common positive objectives.
Thank you, Dr. Kissinger. Let's become less mysterious, quote unquote, and also to create and identify the common goals for the near future. Thank you so much. Really, so many people ask you online, Dr. Kissinger, what's your secret to be 99 years old and even beyond the 100? What would you say, Dr. Kissinger?
I hope to see you all on my 100th birthday.
Yes, we're looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Dr. Kissinger. All the best to you. We'll see you at the 100 years birthday party. And thank you, everyone. Goodbye, good night, and have a great day. Bye-bye.